This is the second video devotional for Wednesday, January the 3rd, 2024. Well, our scripture reading today for the second devotional is from Psalm 82. Psalm 82, and I've titled it, Remember, God is the final judge when judges fail to execute righteous judgment. Let me read that again. Remember that God is the final judge when judges fail to execute righteous judgment. And so this is a bonus devotional, and if you subscribe to heartofashepherd.com, there you'll find it listed under Hot Topics, which is for subscribers only. Well, as we look at Psalm 82, I believe you're going to notice that many of the core principles and guidelines for Western law, specifically English law and the rules and laws of the Republic of the United States, are found here. Unfortunately, corruption and wickedness have permeated our law system and courts in recent decades. In fact, you're going to find that the description of crooked judges in Israel's day is sadly a portrait of our failings as a society and nation. Psalm 82, I invite you to open your Bible. It's just a brief psalm, and yet it would be worthwhile for you to follow with me as I go through it. Now, you'll notice then, the focus of Psalm 82 centered upon the failure of judges of ancient Israel, ancient Judah in this sense, to rule judiciously in the affairs and disputes that arose among the people. Now, the psalmist began his point reminding judges, and I'm going to quote in verse 1, God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judgeth among the gods. Now, the gods there is not a reference to idols as much as it is to man who has been given the responsibility of judging in the affairs of men and women. Thus, the God of heaven was portrayed in a posture of supreme authority and presiding over the gathering of, quote, the mighty. Now, you're reminded that wherever judges have sway in the affairs of humanity, all should be forewarned. God is the final judge. Well, for our first point, consider with me verses 1 through 4. And here we have the Lord's inquisition of judges and those in authority. So after the psalmist reminded the lawgivers in verse 1 that God is sovereign, he then reproved the judges. In fact, he demanded, and I quote, How long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Verse 2. So the judges of that day, like many politicians, lawyers, and judges in our day, were derelict in their duty. They were dishonest in their judgment and guilty of accepting bribes and granting favors to the wicked. And so the psalmist reproved the judges, and he reminded them that they were entrusted with the responsibility to, and I quote, defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and the needy, deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked, verses 3 and 4. And so judges were not to favor the poor and orphans to the neglect of justice. They were, however, to ensure justice for the weak and oppressed, and any in need of justice, regardless of their financial or social status. I'm going to put an asterisk there and just make a comment. What we're watching in our world today, and particularly in our United States, is the fact of catering to the loudest segment of our society, liberals and others that want to wear the label of oppression, even suggested reparations, that they ought to somehow be paid for the sins of 100 or 150 years ago. Well, that is absolutely foolish. First of all, they were not alive 100 and 150 years ago, and so they haven't suffered any of the things that they would suggest that they ought to be somehow repaid for, even to the point of neglecting justice for us in this day. They would like to be exempted from justice. Well, sadly, that is a sign of the decay of a culture and the decay of a nation. And then consider with me verse 5 then. The judges presided in ignorance and darkness. Wow, I really think that is very descriptive of the law and lawmakers in our day. You see, we're reminded then as we look at verse 5 that when the balance of justice is weighed in favor of the wicked, darkness prevails over a nation, and the principles of truth and righteousness are, quote, out of course, literally unstable. The foundations are eroding. That is what is happening in our culture here in these United States. The borders open. People are coming across illegally. They are breaking the law even in their presence in the United States. And then, of course, we have lawgivers who give them a pass on it, not requiring of them the responsibility of being answerable to the law. No wonder we're overrunning our culture by lawlessness. And then notice with me in verse 6 and 7, the appeal of the psalmist to the judges, an appeal to the judges. In verse 6, the psalmist admonished judges and lawgivers to remember that they were, quote, gods, little g, meaning they were representatives of the Most High God who rules in the affairs of heaven and earth. Now, granted, we often have in judgeship positions in our world today people that somehow think they have become gods, attorney generals that are lawless in their application of the law, the judges who are not balanced in making sure that they weigh judiciously that which is right and that which is wrong according to the law. And yet, as we look at this thought here on verse 6, the Most High God, they were just little gods, and yet they were mere mortal men. And that's what the psalmist is reminding these judges. You're mortal men, and you will face the righteous judgment of the Lord in verse 7. And so the psalmist concluded by appealing to God to execute judgment, to render justice to all nations and people on the earth. Well, a closing thought. Be assured of this, that God will judge those who wield the authority of the law. Unfortunately, the nations of the world are plagued by dishonest politicians, crooked lawyers, and unjust judges who often rule in favor of the wicked and oppress the poor and powerless. Nevertheless, remind all in authority that God is the final judge. Every man, woman, boy, and girl will stand one day in the shadow of God's throne and face His judgment. Well, then it will come to pass what Paul wrote to the believers in Rome, that every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then every one of us shall give account of himself to God. If you're in a position of a leader, a lawgiver, a politician who creates the laws, a policeman who enforces the law, or a judge who weighs the guilty, be assured of this, every one of us will give an account to God in eternity. May you and I live, not only revere Him, but even live in fear of His judgment, that we might be accounted righteous, not just in the eyes of man, but particularly in the sight of a holy God. Well, thank you for being a part of this daily devotional. God bless. Bye-bye.